In the late 1990s, we were overestimating the short-term impact. People were creating business models that assumed things would take off much more rapidly than they did. And then the bubble burst, and people soon started underestimating the longer-term impact, which is what we're feeling now. And that's a point that I've made in using Amara's Law. The other thing that's interesting about Amara's Law and is relevant to the online news industry is that if you research using some of those terms in Amara's Law online, you'll find it not only attributed to Roy Amara, but to Paul Saffo. And actually, if you keep digging around, you'll find it attributed to Roger Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Winston Churchill, Mark Twain. In fact, Doc Searles wrote an interesting blog posting noting that he also found references to it cited to Bill Gates, to Doc Searles himself, to Paul Saffo, to Scott McNeely, to John Robb, and to Doc Searles again. So I think we all understand that there can be a lot of interesting information and attribution that occurs online. I hope Paul will enlighten us about maybe the reality of Amara's Law and where it came from, along with many other things. And now let me bring on Paul Saffo.
It's wonderful to be here, though I have to admit I did pause a little bit because I went, oh my God, journalists. And I am the last thing standing between you and cocktail hour. And thank God we have new age journalism. You know, it's no longer the age of the heroic journalists of old. There were some here in San Francisco, a famous columnist here who would go out to lunch with his friends and they would have a couple of what they referred to as brown drinks, or, you know, vitamin V, as Herb Caen referred to vodka, and then they would go home back to the office and write their stories. I mean, let's face it, they were gods. They were truly gods. And I'm glad you're just the Chardonnay set, so you won't be too impatient. What I want to do is share with you some thoughts about the larger context behind what's afoot. You know, first of all, it's a wonderful time to be doing this because even though the rest of the country, you know, the mood is pessimism is the new black, journalists being strangely contrary, and you all are feeling pretty good about your industry, which is amazing. And I think you have reasons to feel good about it, though frankly, it's, as I will get into, the uncertainty is a bit unsettling. But I think this is a great time to be involved in media. You're deep into the entrepreneurial startups and the like, so what I want to do is step back and offer you some context. I'm going to pull a couple of rules about forecasting out of a recent piece of mine in the Harvard Business Review on forecasting and apply them to specific. I keep trying to change the world, and I say, well, you know, it's okay to kind of make money too, so it's okay to make money. But first, let me start with some news. For the future of news and, in fact, for the entire publishing and media industry business. And that's good news because it spells opportunity. At times it can also be a little overwhelming. You know, one feels just a little bit like John Jacob Astor, who, while sitting in the bar of the SS Titanic, was hurt. You know, folks, this is like church. Normally it's come early and get a back seat. Here it was come early and get a seat close to the door. There are actually seats over here, and you're very welcome to either sit on the floor or walk in front. It's not a problem. And you, by the way, anybody can leave at any time. And there are seats back there too. So as John Jacob Astor, his immortal words while sitting in the bar of the SS Titanic, I know I asked for ice, but this is ridiculous. Well, it leads to the first rule that I suggest you pay attention to. As a forecaster, one rule of thumb I have learned in my time is when change clusters at the extremes, when things are happening, when you have two contradictory events happening at the same time, that is the Doppler whistle of something really big coming down the tracks. It is going to surprise you. So I noticed something in November 2007, and I actually took the time to collect the data then because I go to Davos every year. I'm an advisor to the World Economic Forum and a guest of theirs, and I host a little nerds dinner. And the conceit of the nerds dinner is we always ask a forecasting question that is answered after several bottles of nice Swiss wine. And then the year following, we give awards to the person who was most right and most wrong. Well, here was the funny thing I noticed in late 2007. The price of Google stock was going upwards towards $800. And the price of gold per ounce was going up towards $800. And $800 being a key number because that was the record high per ounce price for gold in the early 1980s. And I thought, how strange. When times are good, gold is down. When times and stocks are up. And when times are bad, you know, stocks are down and gold is up. And in November of 2007, both were up. And I said to my clients, grab your bank accounts and run, because something is going to happen and I don't think it's going to be good. Well, we're seeing change clustering at the extremes in your business, you know, the larger business of publishing as well as news. And I would not think of your business as the news business. With the kind of change that's happening, with all the boundaries dissolving in everything to do with media, you're not in news. You're in publishing, you're in writing, you're in Hollywood, you're in cheesy advertising, and somewhere in there is journalism. I mean, you know, journalism quality, by the way, we all know whenever we go through a fundamental media change, the first thing that disappears is quality. 100 years ago, that's why we had yellow journalism. You know, what did we do after Gutenberg printed the Bible? Cheap thrillers, how-to books, and pornography. So we're in one of those periods where quality is plummeted. Get over it. It'll come back eventually. But the contradictions we have, you know, bookstores are closing. I shot this just down the street where the Ferrari shop replaced the Sainted Cody's books. But Amazon's selling more books than ever. You know, Jeff even put the smile on his boxes. You know, the Seattle Post went paperless, and, you know, my guess is the New York Times, you know, will be paperless within 2 years, except for the special neighborhood advertiser editions that they probably will do. And at the same time, we know that news no longer breaks, news tweets. It's really changed that much, and news is more fun and more interesting than ever. So uncertainty is good because everything's uncertain because we're going through a fundamental shift. Here's the shift. The information revolution is over. You know, information was a word that made sense when there wasn't very much of it, and what there wasn't very important, like around 1994. When information becomes ubiquitous and goes deep into our culture, we don't call it information anymore, we call it media. So what's really happened is the rest of the world has caught up with you all because you've been swimming in the media world to begin with. But it's a different kind of media. The other shift is from mass to personal. The mass media revolution ended in the mid-90s, and we're in this inchoate personal media revolution. Now I see puzzled looks, and you're saying, give me a break. It is 5:15. I want my drink, and he is telling me these two old words that I've known forever. I'm in the media business, and I know what personal is. I've had a dumb Windows machine for a long time. There are two kinds of words in our vocabulary. There are the entirely new words that come out of nowhere, like a new nova in the night sky that gets everyone's attention. Blog, Twitter, like. And then there are the old words that have been around forever, and we think we understand them, and the meaning has subtly changed out from underneath the word. Personal and media now means something completely different than they have in the past. And I think what you're going to see is, I managed to just put my notes out of order, is that everything's becoming media, and we're in the midst of a change that is eerily similar to what happened in the 1950s and the rise of modern mass media. Now, if there was a God to worship in the change of all of this, someone to really pay attention to and to really understand the opportunities, it would be this gentleman, Joseph Schumpeter. And it's cruel to mention dead economists, but I think it's really important because you all could use the advice of dead economists. You were closer to the web revolution than anybody else. You covered it, but as an industry, you completely missed the point of what it meant for you all. Now, admittedly, it's hard to understand things when you're in the middle of the hurricane, but I hope you don't repeat that mistake. That's why stepping back, getting a larger perspective is so essential. If the 20th century's economic avatar was John Maynard Keynes, focused on monetarism, stability, systems move towards stable, you use policy. The economic god of this century is Joseph Schumpeter, who of course said economic systems are more dynamic, they move towards instability, they are profoundly affected by technologies. A new technology comes in, it creates a new competitive landscape. The incumbents who grew with that technology have a brief period of competitive advantage until the next new technology comes along and just blows everything away, and it happens all over again. That's what he called creative destruction. How many people in this room have used the phrase creative destruction in casual conversation? Raise your hands. Those are the honest ones. The rest of you have all done it, but you're shy. You're journalists. You don't want to raise your hands. I will guarantee that there are maybe 10 people in this room who've read Joseph Schumpeter. You need to go back and read. You don't have to read the whole book. Read the chapter on creative destruction in Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And if you get really excited, go read The Theory of Business Cycles. It is worth your time. Joseph Schumpeter is not a boring person, by the way. How many people played piano when they were kids? And how many of you had the little white busts on the piano of the dead white guys? And you said, who are the square dead white guys? And then you saw the Mozart movie when you were an adult. And you said, if I'd known even that was that crazy, I would have been much more interested in piano. Well, Schumpeter was not some boring, dry economist. Let me tell you one story to whet your appetite. When he was a young man, he stated publicly, he said, I have 3 goals. 3 goals. I want to be the best economist in the world, the best horseman in the Austro-Hungarian Empire because he was an officer in the army, and the best lover in Vienna. And when he was on his deathbed, a friend came to him. He said, hey, Joseph, how'd you do? He says, I so failed. I only realized 2 of my goals. I was not the best horseman in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So pay attention to Joseph Schumpeter, because the waves of creative destruction are, of course, tunneling through every corner of your industry. And it's not just wiping out the incumbents. Everybody is at risk here. We're in a period where we're going to build up and tear down architecture every 18 months for quite a while. Nothing is secure. The only strategy is to flee into the future. Flee into the future as fast as you can, and above all, avoid the mistakes that the incumbents try to do. The music industry. Oh, they're stealing our songs. Hey, I got a really great marketing idea. Let's sue our best customers. In fact, let's sue the parents of our best customers and scare the bejesus out of them. Right, perfect, brilliant. Give that executive another $100,000 a year so he can buy more cocaine to blow up his nose. Technology is the solvent leaching the glue out of the publishing business. Everything is mushing into everything, and new industries are emerging. That's why Google, the search company, just brought out a phone, and it's doing an OS. It's why Microsoft made a browser, and they're trying, once again, to try and make a phone. Good luck, Steve Ballmer. But above all, news is not the organizing filter for your strategy. Media is. The next rule, look back. In fact, look back twice as far as you're looking forward. Many people will say, oh, for God's sake, you're looking at the future through a rear view mirror. Well, I am here to tell you that if a rear view mirror is an extraordinarily powerful forecasting tool as long as you use it in the right way. Mark Twain was alleged to have said, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. You want to look back to find those rhyming patterns, the cycles that repeat themselves. So if you happen to look back about twice as far as today, you get back to 1953 and this show. How many people saw Winky Dink and You when they were kids? Good for you. It was the first interactive television program that was done by putting acetate on the TV screen. It doesn't look very interactive compared to today. It was actually a big success. It was on the air from 1953 to 1957, and then suddenly yanked off the air. Anyone want to guess why it was suddenly yanked off the air? The hint is in this screen. Sir? Some people wrote on the TV that ticked off their parents, but that Hollywood didn't care about their TV. Another guess? Look how close that child's face is to an unshielded cathode ray tube. He is now a senior member of Congress. They realized there was a health issue. Well, it turned out that it was a period like today of interesting failures. Winky Dink went off the air, but its host, Jack Barry, went on to define the television industry. Just like today, new technologies, people scratching their heads trying to figure out what the hell it was good for. Believe it or not, in 1952, people were asking questions, said, just like Twitter today, said, it's great, but how can anyone make any money with this? You know, they don't give us 50 cents when they turn it on. Well, the answer was, don't worry, we'll figure it out. Same thing today. The future constantly arrives in unexpected ways. Think back to 1989, 1987, 88, 89, you know, HyperCard had come out, Knowledge Navigator had come out, we had interactive hypertext, and everybody said in the publishing industry, we're going to have electronic books, hypertext on discs, CD-ROM is the big revolution. They said it in this very building. Imagine going back through time, walking into this room, telling the publishers who are sitting here, CD-ROM will be a niche market for teenage boys playing video games. And we're never going to do electronic books. But within a decade, we're going to have a ubiquitous global hyperdocument system that anyone can connect to anything, anywhere. Little kids will hook up to servers in Tokyo to download their latest images of their Japanese anime cartoon characters. And it incidentally is going to trigger the biggest explosion in consumer spending in over 20 years. And guess what the hottest thing being sold will be? The thing that in 1988 they thought was dead. Imagine saying to people in this room in 1988, this global hyperdocument system is going to arrive by 1995, and it's going to be huge good news for bookstores. They would have locked you up. Well, the same sorts of surprises are in store for us today. Next rule, change is never linear. It looks like this. It's an S-curve. You know, I teach in an engineering school at Stanford. I spent a lot of time around mathematicians. I can tell you the challenge of S-curves is nobody understands S-curves. We are linear thinkers, even though we live and die by the mother of all S-curves, Moore's law, which, you know, doubles the number of circuits you can put on a chip every 18 months, dramatic drop in price, and the like. Trust me, nobody understands or appreciates this. This is why a Furby had, 10 times the processing power carried on board the Apollo command module when we went to the moon. Technology, this stuff just keeps getting cheaper and more powerful. And the problem is that we are linear thinkers. Neil mentioned Amara's law. Roy Amara was my mentor and close friend. And this pretty much is an explanation of why Amara's law works. In Silicon Valley, the problem with S-curves is everybody focuses on the inflection point. They ignore that flat spot to the left. In fact, in Silicon Valley, we generally draw this as a hockey stick. It just keeps going upwards and never levels off. It is the executive with the idea is so obvious, he needs no marketing, no sales, the product will sell itself. This is why, as they say, venture capitalists sleep like babies. They sleep for 2 hours, wake up and cry, sleep for 2 hours. Well, so we tend to ignore the flat spot, and we look for that inflection point, and it means that what happens is ordinary people get surprised when the inflection point arrives. Like, whoa, where'd the web come from? Well, it was almost 20 years old by the time it arrived. Visionaries and professionals get to be wrong twice. You stand at the start of the S-curve and your idea seems so obvious that you think it's going to happen tomorrow, and I guarantee you, you're going to wait for at least a decade before it happens, because even in Silicon Valley, most ideas take 20 years to become an overnight success. And just before it takes off, you're going to turn around and say, this will never happen. So the reward for being a visionary is you get to be wrong twice. What fun. And the reason why it's attributed to so many people, Neil, is like so many things, this is a description of how the world works. This S-curve constant in media, I've chased it as far back as Gutenberg in 1452. Took 50 years to go from movable type to Aldous' first modern book. The secret here today is change in media is extraordinarily slow. So if you don't want to wait around for 20 years, follow this rule. cherish failure, especially if it is someone else's. So, a case in point, if you were imagining this S-curve, because it applies to more than just media, imagine this is the S-curve showing the number of expeditions going to the Western Hemisphere from Europe, and you ask yourself, where on this curve did Columbus fall? Was he way off at the left? Of course not. He was at the inflection point. Or to put it more precisely, Columbus was not the first European to make it to the New World. He was the first European to make it back. Well, others made it back, but they didn't make it back at a time that mattered. Leif Erikson sailed to the New World in the 10th century, and he came back, after going to Greenland, came back to his friends. He said, I found a new world. And they said, that's great. What does it look like? He says, well, there's a bunch of snow and a bunch of trees and some water. And they looked around and they said, so? Now, if Leif Erikson had gotten blown off course and ended up where most of Stockholm is in February, that is Miami, our history would be very different. We would all be talking like this. Instead, Columbus got there at the right time and came back to an audience that was ready to listen, and history ended up being the way it is. Well, in Silicon Valley, the way we do this, that flat spot is paved with the rubble of failure. And in fact, the reason why Silicon Valley succeeds is we know how to fail in the right way. And we all need to take that lesson from Silicon Valley and apply it to the news business. The web took off in Silicon Valley, which is very odd. It was invented on the Swiss-French border by an English boffin who thought he was designing groupware for physicists. Well, it took off in the Valley because we had a whole industry collapsing right about the same time. Interactive television. Took $1 billion of Hollywood money, left a crater, financial crater big enough to be seen from the moon without field glasses. That, and it trained a whole generation of C++ programmers about rich media. Those were the pioneers of the web. Take US Web, in its day the largest web building company on the planet, with a valuation approaching that of General Motors when General Motors was actually worth something. The first building of any size they rented was from Apple. Apple rented it to them at below market rate, said, what the hell, you can take the contents to it. It was Apple's interactive TV studio. Look for things that have been failing. Look for something that's, if you want a short-term success, look for something that's been failing about 20 years. If you're in a large organization, you'll know it because you go say to someone, I think we should do this. And they'll go, oh, God, we tried that back when Jesus lost his sandals. That's going to fail for sure. That's a sure sign that it's going to take off in the short run. How many of you are on Second Life at one time or another? Okay, I know. Don't anybody say I got too much of a first life for Second Life. This is the first graphical MUD. This is the first graphical antecedent for MUD. It was called Habitat. It came from Lucasfilm in 1985. It was just like Habitat, except low res and very slow. It did not really succeed, and it was followed by one failure after another until we got EverQuest and the like, and then we got to Second Life. And I realize Second Life isn't quite taking off, but it is still a very active community, a big economy. We use it at Stanford. I'm on the Stanford Library Board. We have our own island. We actually do meetings in Second Life. But the point is, it failed and failed and failed, and then it took off. Second Life itself will eventually fail. We're going to have bigger successes beyond that. So the question to ask yourself is, what failures are you ignoring? Today is a moment where a whole bunch of things are arriving late and unexpectedly. And what failures are blinding you to the big opportunities? Media beget media. So look for indicators. Look for things that are weird, that don't fit, that just don't seem to make any sense. So let me give you an example. How many of you woke up this morning and said, my life is just incomplete without a personal accelerometer? Or a personal radar, or a personal RFID chip that's in the mandible of this hand. So be honest, did anybody wake up that way? So, does anybody in the room use one of these? Polar health monitor, watch, cardio band, a couple of you. Madam, do you load your data up to a computer on this? No. Does anybody upload their computer data? You do. Sir, you do. Are you single? That's very odd, because what turns out is most of the people who do this, so you use the cardio band on your watch when you exercise and it tells you your pulse and everything else, and you can upload it to a computer, Here's some data that I uploaded off of MySpace and Facebook. It's not my data. These are single males looking for a date. Why would you do this? Why would you publish your personal body telemetry? It's to get a date. And the guy in the lower or the upper right there is basically saying, I got a resting pulse equal to Lance Armstrong, and I'm not even taking any drugs. So this is publishing. This is data publishing, and we're now going to accelerometers. And you say, well, this is weird, this is obscure, this could never go mainstream. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Does anybody here have the Nike iShoe? iShoe couple up here. This is a popular enough product that it's, they've got little displays at the counters at the Apple store. So basically what it is that it's a little wireless transponder in your shoe with an accelerometer, and it has a wireless link to your iPod, and as you're running along, you preset some things. As you're running along, if you start to slow, it records all your data, and if you start to slow down, it tells your iPod, and your iPod puts up inspiring music to make you run faster. And this is broad enough that mountain bikers are now using their iPods to collect the GPS tracks of their bike rides and publishing it up and showing to friends. This is publishing. This is publishing. And it can be part of the news. And by the way, the guy who's responsible for this, his name was Michael Chow. He had been at Apple, he introduced the Newton, he then went to Nike, he built this. Michael just got brought back to Apple last week. And Michael's being brought back. Of course, Apple says nothing, and I don't know anything, and I really don't know anything, otherwise I couldn't say it. Michael's coming back to lead the marketing for Apple's new tablet, which I thought might have come out today. I bet you it comes out Monday, maybe. Or maybe, who knows? Someday when I die, I want to die at Apple because everything there arrives late. But it's in the wind, and it's going to start to happen. But let me take a deep dive on this, the context, the indicators behind this. I look at this weird stuff like a polar monitor and I say, pay attention to this. This is odd. This doesn't fit. The iShoe suggests to me maybe there's something in here, and I think there's something for news. Some history. The 1980s, cheap microprocessor arrived, late 1970s. It made the 80s the decade of the microprocessor. It was a processing decade, and the poster child was the personal computer, while we tried to process everything we could get our hands on. The 90s were shaped by the advent of another technology, and that was cheap lasers. Cheap laser diodes in the late 1980s. It allowed us to do CD-ROM, to do fiber optic bandwidth, and the like. And it, in contrast to the 80s, a processing decade defined by the microprocessor, the symbol was the personal computer. The 90s were an access decade where the devices in our lives mattered not by what they processed for us, but what they connected us to. And of course, the poster child of that decade was the World Wide Web, which would have been impossible without all of that bandwidth that emerged. Well, this decade is actually being shaped not by the semantic web and all the things people talk about. The real revolution in this decade is cheap sensors. Things like the sensor in that iShoe, cheap video, the hundreds and hundreds of video cams on telephone poles, RFID chips into the logistics change. In the 80s, we built our computers. In the 90s, we networked them together. In this decade, we are hanging eyes, ears, and sensory organs on them, and we are asking them to observe and manipulate the world on our behalf. And what could that possibly have to do with publishing? Who here actually is, like a news reporter who actually does it? Okay. You will be replaced by robots. You will be replaced by robots. You are already being replaced by robots for breaking news. Here's a screenshot I grabbed this morning just as I was heading out. It wasn't the most recent one. I had to go back through my email. Preliminary earthquake report. This comes from the USGS Seismic Center. And if you read down below the event ID, it reads, "This is a computer-generated message and has not yet been reviewed by a seismologist." Breaking news about earthquakes is being delivered to us by machines, by robots. So they are creeping into your business. And in the future, the web, once upon a time, this is hard to remember, but once upon a time, the global telecommunications system was used mainly for voice conversations. Very strange. I mean, most of it was used for voice conversations. Today, voice accounts for a tiny fraction of 1% of total telecommunications traffic. It's no longer used by people talking to people, it's by machines talking to other machines on people's behalf. Everybody assumes today that the web is a publishing medium and that the things at the end doing the viewing are people. Within 10 years, probably sooner, within 10 years, the percentage of the web that actually is moving data that is looked at by people at the end will be way below a fraction of 1%. Not only are the robots going to steal the reporters' jobs, the reporters are going to be selling their stories to be read by robots. And go try and figure out how you figure out your circulation numbers when you say, hey, we are read by 400,000 bots. Sounds weird. Doesn't make sense. Someone's going to make a fortune doing this. And think of, those, say, who here are editors? Think how much nicer it will be when it's the robot handing in the story, and the most they can say is that the laser printer ate my story or whatever, and you don't have to worry about personnel issues and the like. So anyway, next rule, inversion. Look, a particular kind of indicator is when things are the reverse of what they seem. A good friend of mine, John Markoff, good friend of many of you in this room, noticed an inversion phenomenon in the early 90s when he noticed that a supercomputer line in Silicon Valley, the chips coming off were going to two different machines. Same line, two different machines. The KSR supercomputer and the new Nintendo machine. Very strange. Once upon a time, the most advanced technologies went to the warlords and trickled down to the rest of us. These days, they go to 15-year-olds and the rest of us have to wait our turn. Well, think of other reversals. Television is going to the web. This is way the heck back in 2005. It was the first TV talk show in a virtual world. Any of you played Halo 2? I'm sure you watched This Spartan Life on the web. The host, Damon Lacademian, it was the only talk show I knew where the guests in some instances, got shot and killed and had to be revived before the interview was over. And then things like this, Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. How many people are Dr. Horrible fans? Oh, you've got to get out more. Jesus, this is terrible. This is shocking. Dr. Horrible, Joss Whedon did this in 2008 during the writer's strike. Sing-along blog. This is kind of like Winky Dinky. This won an Emmy, folks. This won an Emmy. It's great stuff. And who knew that Doogie Howser could sing? Big reversal and a big indicator. And then, of course, video is moving from TV to the PC with Hulu. And then there are other sides. After I shot this, I went in and I said, you won't take my paperbacks? He says, oh, no, don't worry about those. What we're finding is people no longer subscribe to newspapers. They're just throwing them into their newspaper recycling bins. So, we have lots of reversals. And books are disappearing. However, we had the 128, the Kindle, which was the 128K Mac of its category. How many of you remember the first Macintosh? It was great. It was so full of possibility, except it was so slow. You had a sense you were buying a visitor from the future. Well, so far, ebooks have been like Bakelite. Bakelite was the first plastic invented in 1907 by William Bakelin. Thermoset phenol resin was its official name. What happened when we had this marvelous new material? Everybody spent their time trying to make it look like wood and tortoiseshell. Until eventually someone said, this makes really crappy wooden tortoiseshell. Let's let plastic be plastic, and then it got interesting. We did this with media. We always use our new media forms to do slavish imitations of the old thing. The Gutenberg Bible, probably, it was the best, highest quality book published for 50 years, 60 years afterwards. It was a slavish copy of what the scriveners and scribes are doing by hand. And by the way, thank God Apple did not invent email. If they had invented email, you would have typed it on screen. The paper would have unfolded on screen. You would type it, we were ready to send. The paper would have folded up in 3 pieces. An envelope would have appeared. It would have slipped in the envelope. And then you would have been expected to lick the screen in order to send it. But this is just the start. The real story here, and we're all waiting to see, is, what is the new Apple tablet? A couple of things you can bet on. Probably going to be based on the iPhone OS, not the Mac OS. It's not about reading. It's about media. This stupid idea that I watch video on one thing, and I read words on another thing, and I listen to music on another thing. I mean, come on. It's supposed to all be together. I think what you're going to see with that machine is it's going to lead to entirely new kinds of media experiences. We're headed into a world where a bunch of old media that didn't quite fit are going to go mainstream. Before HyperCard and the web, the only place you got hypertext was in Roget's Thesaurus and a couple of kids' books. Now it's mainstream. Everybody uses hypertext. Think of media today that don't quite fit, that haven't quite taken off. Like, how many people here love good short stories? Oh, come on. Okay, the rest of you must be shy. It's impossible to sell them in paper. But imagine doing what Jeff calls info snacking and selling a short story at a time. This, I think, might even be good for poetry. I think we will see, we're going to read long form media on our tablets. We're going to read short stories on our iPhones. We're going to read poetry on our Blackberries, and we're going to read haiku on our pagers and cell phones. Actually, we do already. It's called Twitter, 17 syllables. So this is a period of really big change. New media forms, and they're going to wash over the news industry. Now, I want to do a deep dive on the difference between mass and personal media here. Mass media, the key technology was the television. Personal media, the key technology is the web. Mass media came to our living rooms. Personal media comes everywhere, devices in our pockets, on our belts, and the like. Mass media, the experience was we watched and we consumed. And I'll come back to that word consume in a bit, because I'm going to close with a brief lecture on the future of the economy, and I'm not joking. And personal media is a world in which we participate and create. Mass media delivered the world to our living rooms, but all we could do is press our nose against the glass and watch. Shake your fist at the TV. Well, actually, you did something else. You went out and you bought stuff. And you didn't realize it, but if you didn't go out and buy stuff, the television program didn't stay on the air because the advertiser didn't support it. So your interactivity consisted of consuming products for money. In personal media world, we participate and we create. And it's not participation is optional, it's mandatory. Think about Google, which I think is the quintessential personal medium. You can't watch Google. If you tried to watch Google, it'd be like that old Cheech and Chong skit, Hey man, what are you watching? Oh, really boring cowboy and Indians movie. Well, he was watching the test pattern. You can't watch Google, you got to put something in to get something out. So the personal media world is a world in which participation is not an option, it is an essential part of the experience. That's the world of YouTube, blogs, comments. In the news business, newspapers are figuring this out by allowing not just participation on news stories, but layered participation. The real grumblers and trolls can write those snarky notes at the bottom, and then the more sensible people can go tisk-tisk by, flagging it up or down. So you have different layers of commitment, different layers of participation, and that's essential to the story. And mass media was the world of the few and the large, the big media companies. Personal media is the world of the many and the small. I am not saying that the big companies are toast or the big media companies are dead. In fact, in a personal media world, I think we're going to see media companies emerge who will dwarf the size of the largest of media companies today. But they are going to get large by enabling the activities of the many and the small. Look how big Google's got by turning us all into Google employees. Look at how big eBay got by turning everybody into buyers and sellers. Well, this hints at a fundamental change, a change vastly bigger than your industry. I mean, let's face it. You could take the entire news industry, and Bill Gates could buy you all with 15 minutes of his net worth. Well, at least before last November. No, the bigger change is the information economy. There's a new economy emerging. We've talked about it for a while. It's now close enough we can see it. But it's not the information economy. Go back 100 years to when this picture was taken. A young worker in front of a time clock at a plant. That was a newly emergent industrial economy. And the central actor in that economy was the worker, and the symbol of that economy, in my opinion, was the time clock. It was a symbol because the industrial economy promised abundance. The truth was, it was constantly chasing the ghost of scarcity. It was trying desperately to satisfy the desires of a newly emergent middle class and the working class who worked in the factories. And they promised abundance, but it was scarce enough that, like during wars, we rationed, we recycled things. It was an economy of Henry Ford. Here with a Model T in 1908, the year automobiles took off. And I'm sure you all remember the story that Henry said, you can have any color Model T you want, so long as it is black. Does anyone know why he chose black? I mean, he could have said any color you want so long as it's white. That wouldn't show dust. The reason why he chose black is he was so focused on efficiency on his assembly lines that he tested all of the lacquers he could get his hands on, and he discovered black dried the fastest. And that allowed him to run his lines that much more quickly and that much more efficiently. Everything about the industrial economy was about efficiency. You know, the business bestseller of the time was Fred Taylor's Principles of Scientific Management, 1911. It was about making workers like virtual cogs in a machine. There was a term, Fordism, Taylorism. The motto was one right way. So those of you in management, take this lesson and take it back to your company. Taylor's idea was you study the heck out of an activity, like he did at a place called the Hawthorne Wire Works, which I'll come back to. Figure out the most efficient way to manufacture it, and then get every worker to do it exactly the same way. Imagine going back to your shops, and those of you who have employees say, hey, I got this great idea. We're all going to do it exactly the same way. That's how different a world this was. Well, what happened after 1900 was they got better and better at producing stuff. Sure, there were periods of rationing during the wars, but when World War II ended, a very strange and frightening thing happened to the industrial magnates. They discovered that in the preceding 50 years, they'd gotten so good at making stuff that when they converted from making military war material back to consumer stuff, they were now capable of making more stuff for civilians than civilians wanted to buy. They were terrified of a depression that would follow the war as they followed all wars. You notice there was no depression after World War II. That's because that moment of success marked the end of the industrial economy. Economies are not done in by their contradictions or their failures, folks. They are done in by their success. And the industrial company got so good at doing it that it ended. And it was replaced by a new economy, and that was the consumer economy. And the central actor of that new economy is no longer the worker, the person who produced, but the young lady on the left, the consumer, the person who purchased. And just as the time clock was a symbol of the industrial economy, the symbol of this new consumer economy was the credit card, back then called the charge card. And we forget just how important the credit card was. Before charge cards, if you wanted to buy a refrigerator, you went to the bank for a loan. When you got your charge card, the charge company gave you the loan. You bought it. It was an ability to buy things even when you couldn't afford them. And it was a profound, profound shift in power. In the industrial economy, this guy was the most powerful guy. The VP of engineering. I made it. I'm the guy responsible for overcoming the scarce thing in the economy. In the consumer economy, the scarce thing it was overcoming was not production, but demand. And the VP of engineering was replaced by this guy, the VP of sales and marketing. He said, hey, dude, I sold it. I'm more important. And the central actor in that economy was neither one of these people, but this young lady. I bought it. That's what the consumer economy was all about. And what we started doing in the 1950s, profound shift. You know, by the way, no coincidence that sort of marked the beginning of the twilight of unions, because power had shifted from the builder to the buyer. And so even though unions still keep trying to make their way back, power shifted. And by the way, it was an age of media. Television was central to this because they had to inflame desire For the consumer economy to work, you had to inflame desire. You know, the joke during the Vietnam War is, for God's sake, don't ration. For God's sake, buy more stuff that's essential to our competitiveness. TV is what caused people to desire things they never imagined they needed. This god of marketing, Ron Popeil, the Vegematic is the symbol of the consumer society. We lived for 10,000 years as a civilization without the Vegematic, but thanks to TV and constant advertising, Ron made us realize that our lives were incomplete without the Vegematic. The same exact stuff is happening today, but in a different sort of economy. Now, and by the way, just as proof of this shift, this is a picture of the Hawthorne Wireworks. How many people here have heard of the Hawthorne effect? Central principle in management. They said, we're going to do time and motion studies on you nice people at this plant making wire for the phone company. So just ignore us. We're going to change some stuff around, but we're going to see what helps your efficiency. And they discovered that no matter what they did, people got more efficient. Raise the light level, they got more efficient. Lower the light level, they got more efficient. Until finally someone realized, oh, Jesus. Of course, what we're doing is we told them they're special, and every time we change something, we remind them they're special, and they get more efficient. Well, that's just a footnote in history, but let me tell you what happened to the Hawthorne Wireworks. It became a shopping mall. So you can see the tower of the plant. There's the plant, and here's the tower behind the Hawthorne shopping mall. And you notice that that mall is pretty empty and sorry looking. It is one more indicator that the consumer economy has ended. The shift from mass media to personal media, we're in a new economy. The new central actor in this economy is not the producer, the person who creates, nor the consumer, the person who purchases. It is a new economic animal who both purchases and consumes in the same single act. It is as profound as a shift in 1950, and hidden in this is the secret to the economic model of news for the future. It is a world in which, for example, before YouTube, the only way you got your video on television was to be an employee of ABC, CBS, or NBC. And before Wikipedia, the only way you got to do an encyclopedia entry was to be a certified real smart person or an employee of Encyclopedia Britannica. Now anyone can do it. Anyone can publish now. Now, the one thing is, you think about this, you know, these are modest examples, but they still look like traditional publishing. You know, most people don't put Wikipedia entries in, more people watch YouTube than entry. No, the classic example of, and these are other examples, by the way, of this new economy in which everybody is a creator. You know, World of Warcraft, you get in, you build your own role, you build your own world. And of course, Guitar Hero 2, you don't just listen to music anymore, you strum along and you pay money to participate. But the mother of all examples is, of course, Google. So here's a way to think about this. Liz, I know you work at a company, another company, but I know you use Google from time to time. Or I'll take you off the, yeah. So Liz, what was your Google subscription last month? What was, come on, you remember, remember LexisNexis and Lockheed Dialog? I got in trouble when I was a graduate student because I had a big Lockheed bill. Zero. Wrong. You guys pay for Google. It's a model even more diabolical than publishing. I mean, it's as bad as a magazine subscription. No, you pay with the search string you put in. You pay with the search string. You don't even get the results out until you pay Google. But you think it's valueless because, you know, you want the answer. But when aggregated with those other search strings, it's what makes the Google founders richer than God. Here is a secret. Google is bigger than these companies. And the reason why, so Neil and I have known each other for a long time. And I say to Neil, would you write something for me? Because I know he's a hell of a good writer. He says, sure, Paul, what do you want? I say, well, how about a nice book on competitiveness, you know, something like Michael Porter does, something with authority, 900 pages or so. He goes, hey, wait, no. I say, okay, take it back, you know. Neil, we're both middle-aged, you know, it's our turn to do what all middle-aged white guys do. A 250-page book on management telling everybody how to do it right, even though for our whole careers we made nothing but mistakes. He says, well, cool, call my agent, maybe I could do it, give me the right price. I say, nah, Neil, no time. How about a 20-page paper? In fact, not a 20-page paper, how about a one-page, no, not even a white page or a paragraph. Give me haiku, give me 17 syllables and it doesn't have to rhyme. Give me a Google search string or Twitter. He says, sure, I'll do it right now. The companies that get biggest in this new world of personal media, in this new creator economy, are the companies that harness the smallest quantum of creative act. Google is bigger than Wikipedia because they ask for less words. There is a company out there somewhere that will be bigger than Google. I don't know who they are, but I know what they're going to do. They're going to harness a single click. And there's a company out there bigger than the company that can harness a single click because it'll harness the information from robots doing the clicks for us. So I'm standing between you and drinks, and I will finish with one last piece of advice, and finish where I started. And I start by going in the right direction. Embrace uncertainty. Love uncertainty. Love the possibilities that uncertainty presents. There has never been a better time to be in the news business. But make sure you look for lessons everywhere you go. And I'll close with one last lesson at my favorite espresso bar. Like I said, and I'm not proud. I'm a futurist, which means I'm sort of an intellectual rag picker. I'll take advice from any direction I can. And I was in my espresso bar recently, and here's what it said on the counter. Hooray for tips. I like tips just fine. It's the part beneath. If you fear change, leave it in here. If you really want to make a difference in this business, you know, get over, you know, make a difference, whether it's in your earnest journalist sort of way, you know, don't forget, you are standing on a whale. You're standing on a media whale. For God's sake, don't fish for minnows. If you want to find the big stuff, don't fear change. Leave it in here. And I've talked over time, so I will just stop there and say thank you very much.